Thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is a mid-afternoon panel. I hope you are well caffeinated. We've talked a lot about many big issues all through the day. One that came up a lot is the Inflation Reduction Act. If you were having this panel in Europe, you would talk a lot about the Green Deal. But this panel is going to try and focus on challenges of emerging economies. And they are decidedly different. What rich countries can do with their balance sheet and with their capability of being able to pump money into the system is not something that's easy enough for other countries to pull off. And with me on the panel, we have a really interesting set of countries with people with very different experiences coming into it. And we'll try and touch on those different country experiences and what we can learn from each other in the process of accelerating the energy transition. And so if you don't have the caffeine boost, maybe I'll start with a quick fire question round. I'll get us warmed up. For each one of you, what is the one thing that Morocco needs to accelerate the energy transition?
What Morocco would need, one thing. I would say very, very fast and very quickly, I think the banker and engineer in me would say more investments in grid and storage, quality investments in scale. But I think the minister in me would say better governance and streamlining of bureaucracy to win this energy transition.
What about China?
China, I think fundamentally I agree with the minister that we need a smarter grid and more storage capacity, energy storage capacity, because China is now really have been spending so much efforts to try to expand our renewable energy, and by the end of last year, for the first time, our wind, solar, and hydro put together is larger than the coal power capacity. That's was a historic moment. Having said that, the generation volume, power generation is still lagging far behind of the coal. Part of that is because of the intermittent nature of the renewables. So when you factor in the storage, energy storage part, then the cost is still higher, and so we need to find a way to do it.
Yeah, earlier today I read that China is increasing its imports of coal, even as it is the country that's building the most renewable energy. So there's that dual challenge. What about India, Suman?
So, Akshat, I would say that the most important thing really is not the market demand side, because there is quite a bit of demand. And I know that's something different from what I told you back in the green room. But as I thought about it, I think the real issue is execution on the ground. I think you just need a ton of equipment, you need trained people, you need transmission infrastructure, you need land, and that is not that easy to debottleneck, actually. And as much as you would like to ramp up execution capacities to multifold of where we are right now, and that's all the targets, all the studies tell us that we need to do that, but it's actually the physical execution on the ground of just putting up wind turbines and putting up solar farms. That's not to be underestimated. It's a pretty big challenge, and scaling it up, 3-4x from where we are right now, it's going to require a lot of doing.
And for context, India set a goal of 175 gigawatts of renewables that were to be deployed by the end of 2022, and India missed that goal by about 30%. Now, for context, that goal was increased from a much lower goal, so India did beat the initial goal it had set, but it fell short, and you think execution is the missing component?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there are a number of other factors as well, of course, because you need the demand side to step up as well, and the distribution of the power through utilities. Ultimately, the demand has to come from them, and if there's no strong mandate on them to shift towards renewables, then they'll be a little bit tardy about it. So therefore, that really is an issue as well. But I think now, as you said, the target has been scaled up to about 500 gigawatts by 2030, which is really awesome to have that target. But to achieve it, therefore, requires us to increase the amount of execution that we do every year in India, which is about 15 to 20 gigawatts of renewables, up to about almost 40 to 50 gigawatts every year. And that's really going to be quite challenging, but also therefore exciting.
Right. Now, Minister, when CEOs of energy companies like Sumant come to you, what are the things that they ask for from the government to be able to get their job done as quickly as they would like to?
Right. No, I think this boils down to what sort of offer countries can provide, especially in an era of multiple crises that the world has witnessed. And I think when investors come to Morocco, they already know that we have an undeniable large potential for renewables, solar and wind. They know that we have a pretty decent infrastructure that we have invested in over most of it over the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century. I think usually what sometimes they don't say it as frankly as I would say it right now. They would just ask for transparency and sanctity of contracts, of course, but now more and more visibility on what sort of framework they would have. So that's why usually in Morocco, with that 20 years of experience that the country has in terms of developing renewable projects at scale, we had some successes, but we also have learned some lessons from the past, from those 20 years that enable us today to be able to be much better in executing projects with our partners from the private sector.
Now, sanctity of contracts. It's something that probably will bore the crowd, but it is so important. Sumant, there was an example in India. Now you can look back and smile about it, but could you explain what happened in Andhra Pradesh and how that was so important to ensure that in developing countries, the sanctity of contracts are crucial in enabling the transition?
Yeah, in renewables in general, as we all know, costs have been coming down. And so tariffs have also been coming down. And so there's always a temptation on the part of people who signed earlier contracts who then start saying, okay, look, for the next, let's say, 23 years out of 25 years, I'm going to be paying a lot higher tariff than somebody who signed a contract 2 years later. So the temptation is always to try to see whether you can, jiggle the contract, get out of it, or, put some pressure on the supplier and see if they can come down. And it's not just in India. It's happened in various parts of the world, and it's not unusual. Now, the good thing is that in most cases, I would say that the legal system has actually upheld the sanctity of contracts. And that is now a pretty well-established principle, I think. So to my mind, Akshat, that risk is, or that issue is really no longer there in people's minds. The other thing is now prices are not just going down, they're also going up a little bit because of all the stuff that's happening on the interest rate side that Mads was talking about earlier, interest rates, commodity prices, and so on. So I think we've hit the bottom in some senses, and now you'll start seeing not just plain vanilla renewables, because nobody really wants to buy plain vanilla any longer because there's already enough of it. Now people want products that are centered around renewables, but that can give you a higher quality power in terms of higher plant load factors, or power supplied in certain parts of the day using batteries and so on. So I think now comparing just on a plain vanilla basis, I think that period of time perhaps is a little bit behind us. Now you'll start seeing a lot of different kinds of permutations and combinations happening with renewables. The other thing that is also interesting, of course, which I'm sure you'll ask about, is the whole issue of forward integrating renewables into the fuel side via green hydrogen. And therefore, that's going to lead to a whole different set of use cases.
So I want to come to the finance question, but before that, I should ask the question that's elephant in the room. Is China an emerging economy? We are talking about emerging economies. Would you consider China an emerging economy?
Yeah, increasingly we're facing such a question, and over the past 40 years, China has been through this massive development, and hundreds of millions have been put out of poverty, and we started from very, very low per capita GDP, and but now things are changing very rapidly. So it's sometimes it's a bit hard to catch up to try to categorize. Having said that, I think China is still, per capita GDP is still limited, and are very situation as the factory of the world shows that the market still feel still decide that through this distribution of labor, China is still in a development stage that has yet to reach to the real developed world. So we're still not quite there, but we are obviously very different from some of the other real developing countries. So we understand our responsibility. I mean, that's why China, now made this carbon peak and neutrality pledge 2020 and try to. It's not easy. We need to artificially first, try to peak much earlier. Before, the original target, the original path would be 2040, and our coal consumption going to double from there. Of course, we cannot afford, and the world could not afford. So now it's before 2030. We try to pick even earlier than that, and then try to neutralize, completely neutralize at that time. Now it's already over 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. When we pick, we hope to keep it lower, but it will be more than now. And to completely neutralize this in 30 years of time, if it is 12 billion tons, then it means every year 400 million tons of decarbon, need to be decarbonized, and that's more than the emission volume of California. So it won't be an easy job. Yeah.
Now, talking about financing, Sumant, you mentioned high interest rates, and given the size of the economies you operate in, the impacts of interest rates being risen here in America or in Europe, how does that affect what you have to do? And maybe we start with you, Minister Ben Ali. Has the high interest rate environment, which is likely to be around for some time, affected Morocco's plans?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a cold auditorium in Columbia University, I'd rather not talk about high oil prices or high interest rates. I'd rather talk about resetting interest rates, because everything is relative. I mean, Morocco has issued a bond recently at a relatively competitive 6% coupon for 5 years, 10 years debt. So from that perspective, for similar emerging countries with below investment grade or investment grade ratings, that's pretty good.
Yeah. So you're not worried about high interest rates?
Right. I mean, I would not go as far as pushing and saying I'm not worried. The issue that we are facing, especially when it comes to financing the energy transition and sustainable development of countries like Morocco, like some other emerging markets except China, that we are trying to escape the middle income trap of 3% GDP growth rates. And for us, it's a matter of survival, because it's only by escaping that middle income trap that we can create enough jobs for our young populations. We have to do that while at the same time making sure that there's enough investments going into our energy transition. From that perspective, the issue that we are facing with our 20 years of experience in renewable projects is that I would call it the new energy sector, not renewables only, but the new energy sector is not equipped to manage financial risks, interest rate risks, commodity risks, inflation risk, and even more so now we are seeing that it's a sector that cannot manage climate change risks, because renewable projects, be it hydro, solar, wind, are being affected by climate change and the change in season patterns. And we are seeing today the financial community, some developers being reluctant, or some risk-averse IFIs and MDBs being reluctant in taking a long-term PPAs, power purchasing agreement risks, because of climate change, and they're not sure how the plant will behave in 10 years, 20 years' time.
Right, and Morocco has a plan submitted to the United Nations as a nationally determined contribution where you have a conditional and a non-conditional target. So if you don't get any financial aid, you're able to meet a certain goal. But if you get financial aid, if you are able to deal with those risks, then you can go much faster in the energy transition. And that's just a reality for many emerging economies. Sumant, I recall a conversation we had back in 2019, the low interest rate period here in this country, where you told me that you were worried about the cost of capital, the interest rate that you had to pay as a business in India. Is that still a worry?
Well, you know, Akshat, it's very interesting that at the time we had that conversation, interest rates in the Western world were close to zero, and interest rates in India were maybe 8%. Today, interest rates in India are still high. They're about 8.5%, so they've gone up by 50 basis points. But I don't know whether to be happy or sad that rates in the rest of the world have gone up to, whatever, 6 or 7%. And so therefore, the delta has certainly narrowed. But look, I think the reality is that for renewable energy companies, we are a capital-intensive sector, right? We have to raise a ton of capital, whether debt or equity, to deploy into the projects that we do. And obviously, if the cost of capital in general goes up, of which, of course, debt is a very important part, then that's not good for our projects. And to the extent somebody had bid and won a tariff, and then costs have gone up, interest rates in this case, obviously their margins are getting squeezed. But for future bids, you know, people will build on those higher interest rates and therefore bid higher tariffs. And that then makes renewables a little bit less competitive than other sources of energy. But there's another issue also, which is that because interest rates or cost of capital is going up, and because a lot of renewable energy companies today are growth companies in a sense, even though they're capital intensive, therefore a lot of our actual value sits in the future. In that sense, we're not different from tech companies. And there's a conversation, I think, when Larry was here about unicorns being created in our space. So that's, you know, it's just an indicator of the kind of growth that is going to happen. But if that growth starts getting discounted at higher cost of capital, then the value of companies today obviously falls. And that then impacts their ability to go to the equity markets as well. And that's not good because obviously we all need to raise a ton of capital to finance all of these massive projects that we have. So cost of capital is very, very fundamental, and it is not good for the sector as a whole that rates are where they are and that they're likely to stay higher.
And from Majun, from a China perspective, financing is less of a challenge. But what are the things that China is able to do that other countries can learn from? So perhaps a few successful examples that you think can be translated into other countries and are not tied to the finance question.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether you know, the others can copy what China has been doing when it comes to you know, particularly pollution control, you know, because we have, through this massive industrialization and urbanization, you know, we have, you know, along with the expansion of our energy use and industry development, the air, water, and soil pollution expose hundreds of millions to health hazards. And it was about 10 years ago, and finally the smog in Beijing have made millions of people made their voice heard, and the government responded with a 10-point action, you know, clean air action plan, and then clean water. And through this process, you know, we're part of that process. We managed to bring cut our emission in a significant way. You know, Beijing's PM 2.5 dropped from 89.5 micrograms, I mean the annual average, to 30 last year, to 30. And I know that, you know, I have Indian friends and friends from other parts of the world also saying that they are now experiencing some local pollution problem. And through this process, we managed to, you know, the coal we mentioned, they talk about this is the big elephant in the room, and China's coal consumption used to, you know, to expand in a very, very rapid way. 2002 to 2011, our coal consumption got tripled, and at that time, and but ever since our Clean Air Action Plan, the coal consumption had more or less been kept quite stable.
Right. It's plateaued, but it's being burned
Plateaued.
in a way that
right.
doesn't
I think
create
by itself, it's kind of a, already a contribution to the fighting against climate change. We can't imagine if they continue to just to increase and to expand like before. Having said that, it's not enough. So now what we're trying to do is to try to study how to synergize the two. If we want to continue to enhance our air quality, only the end of the pipe solution, the scrubbers and all of this, it's not enough, to filter everything. So it's actually sometimes increase the carbon emission. So we need to find other ways to restructure, to really try to change our energy mix and clean up our energy source, and then restructure our economy, our industry, and transform the way of our transportation, and all this can only happen with these two being synergized. I think sooner or later, some other developing countries, and particularly the emerging market countries, going to face this as well.
Yes.
So I think this part is probably something that we can.
That's interesting. I mean, it's not directly climate related, but yes, air pollution is a problem that emerging economies have to deal with, and brings out enough public support if governments want to act.
That's right. And if we can combine the two, then that will be quite effective. Yeah.
So before I take in questions from the audience that I've just got, just to take examples from Morocco and India, one of the things that Morocco is starting to get on the path of is exporting clean energy to Europe. For example, Morocco signed an MOU with many European countries at the last COP summit. What will it look like? And will Morocco's energy mix benefit, or is all the benefit going to go to the European countries seeking clean energy?
Before I answer the question, can I disagree with what you just said
Sure.
about pollution and climate? This is, I think, one of the key issues that we are facing today as an international community. And myself, as Minister of Energy Transition for Sustainable Development in Morocco, I mean, I can be as schizophrenic as I want. I cannot pollute on Monday morning and depollute and decarbonize on Monday afternoon. And I think one of the key issues that we are facing, and Morocco as President of the United Nations Assembly for the Environment, one of the key issues that we are facing is that those climate discussions are being held in a room, the biodiversity laws are being held in a room, and pollution and environmental issues are being held in another room. And as human beings, we cannot continue to have, and I don't want to use the word silos, but as long as we don't view these issues in a very integrated way, I don't think we will be able to find and let the private sector take the risk and the financial risks to find the right solutions to address in an integrated manner the biggest challenges of this 21st century. Having set that aside, I'll answer your question about the sustainable electricity.
It's a fair point, though. A lot of what you would do in each of those will help the other.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if we want to decrease the costs at the end of the day of those solutions, we cannot do that. We can only do that by mutualizing the markets. And I feel that China is a great example where by having integrated solutions to address the three issues at the same time is the right way going forward. And this brings me to your question about the sustainable electricity trade MOU that we signed indeed with 5 European countries back in Sharm el-Sheikh. I think it's important to realize that today, in order to, if I bring it back to Morocco's energy strategy, it's based on three key pillars, which have not changed since 2009. First one is, of course, ramping up renewable energy. You all know about the targets that Morocco has set for itself, 42% by 2020, 52% of installed capacity before 2030. And then we have in our NDC and low carbon roadmap more than 82% of installed
If
capacity.
you get financing.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is not access to finance. The issue is actually the mismatch between the pool of finance and the project. Second key pillar is efficiency, energy efficiency on the supply side and demand side. And the third key pillar is integration of markets, regional integration and access to the international markets. And why is that? It's really to create that mutual interdependence. In our case, it's going to be between Africa and Europe, and also including the Atlantic basin if we are thinking LNG and gas in that equation, but also making sure that Morocco having that interconnection with bidirectional, it's the only country in Africa being linked gas-wise, electricity-wise, logistically as well, and now more and more, hopefully, when it comes to carbon markets with Europe, we really want to ensure that we are strengthening those connections. We're building other lines with the Iberian markets. You've heard about some other projects with other countries in the north. But all that is being done so that we don't end up in a very traditional trading relationships. Right. We are increasing our mutual dependence.
Right. And Suman, one example you brought up in your answer, which I think is a really good example, is 24/7 renewables, which is something Renew has worked on, but India as a country has tried to pull out bids to try and do 24/7 renewables, which is, just talk us through the project that you've built and have others copied that idea? Are there bids coming through on 24/7 renewables in other countries?
Yeah, so what's happening is that with the amount of solar that we have on the grid, which just peaks in the daytime and then goes away in the evening, that's useful up to a point. But then beyond that, the demand for plain solar is now diminishing because obviously it's leading to a problem in the middle of the day. Wind is a little bit uneven and a little bit seasonal. So by itself, discoms or distribution utilities are not very happy with it. But what we've tried to do, and this is, full marks to the government for having innovated this, is what they've told us is, look, deliver to us at least an 80% capacity utilization factor across the full year with no single month dropping below 70%, right? Now, there's no time there's no within the day kind of number, but at least at an annual level and a monthly level, they've stipulated certain requirements.
And just for context, if you just ran solar in India, that would be 25%.
That's right. I mean, individually by itself, solar would be about 25, 27%. Wind would be about 30, 35%. But giving the grids 80% power obviously is a lot more acceptable to them because it makes it much easier for them to plan the demand and supply matches. And also, a little bit diminishes the need for them to get into sophisticated management and so on, which is not that easy for them to do because they're not that sophisticated.
Right. Or in the case of the UK or here, you'll have peaker plants, as they are called.
Right.
There'll be fossil fuel power plants standing by in case renewables don't work.
So the way we've been able to do that is by combining or overbuilding wind and solar and being able to, and some degree of storage, and doing that in the most cost-effective or the most capex optimized way, and being able to offer that power to the grid at a very attractive cost, which is below the price that they would pay for coal-based power, which of course is fully dispatchable. But this is almost 30 to 40% cheaper than coal-based power.
When I first read about it, I'm like, everybody should copy it. Have people copied it?
So it's happening. It's certainly happening. In India now, this is going to be the way that most bids will be structured in the future. I don't think you'll see the vanilla bids happening any longer. I mean, they will happen, but of course, at a much lower level. But this requires skill. It requires the ability of knowing what is going to be the profile of generation of solar, what is going to be the profile of generation of wind, what is the correlation between them across different parts of the country, and being able to combine them together. And now, while our first plant is not ready yet, we've actually created a digital twin for it. And we're now able to actually forecast and look at the exact pricing. So it's I think it's a pretty interesting product.
So in some way, you actually answered one of the questions that came from the audience, which was that India's coal production grew 10% last year, despite having a really big renewable energy push. And what can India do to be able to manage that climate goal versus the energy needs that the country has? One answer is building 24/7 renewable projects. Is there another one?
No, I think, look, the fact is energy efficiency is another one. Building more hydro, building more nuclear could be another option as well. But ultimately, look, the reality is power demand in India is growing at about 7 to 8% a year. The economy is growing at about that rate. So, the demand growth is so large that even if we go at the fastest pace possible on building more renewable energy capacity, we're still going to require more power coming from some other source.
Right.
And the easiest place for that to come from really is coal. But I think at somewhere around 2030, 2035, I think is where we'll probably reach peak coal in India.
Right.
That's my personal opinion, of course.
That sort of brings you back to the first point you made around execution. If you're able to execute, you're able to build. Now, two other questions that we have, and we are closing to our time now. Majun, a question around how developing countries, and you've made the case that China should still count as one, can finance their transition without relying on rich countries. These fights show up at every global climate summit. Rich countries aren't giving enough money as they promised to. But what is it that developing countries can do on their own without having to rely on foreign aid?
Yeah, first I have to say, climate justice is a key issue. All this current green, global warming has a lot to do with this historic emission from the industrial age, and so that's a key issue. I mean that commitment of $100 billion per year have not been delivered. I mean that's a problem. Having said that, each of us, when our planet home, our house is on fire, we cannot, just say that if you don't help me, then I won't take our own action. So we all need to try to take our own action on that. And in China, we're working on that, trying to control the pollution, and in the meantime, fight the climate change. But I do believe that eventually, this collaboration, this global climate governance, global collaboration is extremely important. And now we got stuck in this some very serious geopolitical tension, making it very difficult for some major collaboration to happen. But on the national level, having said that, I think there are other tracks. For example, we are working, tracking the performance of more than 10 million companies in China, coming up, color code each one of them, based on their environmental performance. So I want to just cross the message that in China, it's no longer a black hole of information. There's all this information, and we can better, understand the performance of all these companies and so many brands, including some of the major American firms, Apple, Dell, Levi's, Nike, Target. They all tap into our data to manage, to green their supply chain. They motivate their suppliers to disclose 62 million tons of carbon dioxide last year alone, using our digital accounting platform. So there's a big way, I hope that you can all support, if here in this part of the world, if you care about, what's going on in China, in the factory of the world, we emit about 30% of the global total carbon emission. So if you care about that, there is a way for you to intervene.
That's an interesting point. Again, this goes to the answer you'd started with. Transparency is something that can be a force for accelerating the transition. Now, a very last final question, and it's a yes/no question because our time is up. And this is for you, Minister. Is Morocco considering publishing a green bond framework? From the audience. Someone is very interested in investing in green bonds.
A green bond framework or issuing a green bond?
I think it's a framework.
Framework?
Publishing a framework.
Well, we have it already.
Okay. There you go. This has been fantastic. We've got 3 different perspectives from 3 very different economies and 3 people with very different experiences bringing to bear their expertise on the energy transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you.